All right, let's try to cut through all the political noise for a minute. The goal here isn't to get bogged down in today's outrage. It's to get at something deeper, to really understand the fundamental ideas that are driving the biggest debates in America. So let's dive right in.
I mean, it's a pretty simple question, right? But it's also incredibly powerful. If you could just strip away all the sound bites, all the talking heads, what are we really arguing about? What are the core principles that are clashing here? That's what we're going to try and unpack today, to find a little bit of clarity in what feels like a super complicated time. So to help us do this, we're going to lean on a really fascinating source. It's this thought experiment that basically imagines a series of roundtable talks about the country's toughest issues. And what's cool about this format is it lets us get straight to the heart of the arguments, without all the usual political drama.
Okay, so here's the plan. We're going to tackle the fight over order, then the squeeze on the middle class, the whole crisis of trust we're seeing, and we'll wrap up by looking at the huge difference between campaigning and actually governing. All right, first up, let's tackle one of the most visible and honestly, most emotional debates out there, the border. And the thing is, this isn't really just about policy details. It's a fundamental clash between deeply held, competing ideas about what a nation's first duties even are.
So you basically see two completely different ways of looking at this. On one side, you've got what we can call the citizen-first view. For this side, order means control. It means the government, not cartels, decides who comes in. Success is simple. Fewer illegal entries. And their point is that failing to enforce the law is its own form of cruelty because it just creates chaos. Then, on the other side, you have the dignity-first view. From this perspective, order means a legal system that actually works. The disorder we see isn't the main problem, it's a symptom of a totally overwhelmed asylum system. So for them, success would look like shorter processing times, and cruelty is when the system just treats every single migrant like a criminal instead of a person.
And this right here is the central challenge. The source calls it the head-wing test. It's this idea that any real stable solution has to hold two things in its head at the same time. One, the first duty of a government is to protect its citizens, and two, a civilized nation has a duty to treat human beings with dignity. If your plan can't do both of those things, well then it's not a real solution. It's just a campaign speech. Okay, let's shift gears to our next big topic, the economy. And specifically, the squeezed middle class. We're going to dig into why so many families feel this constant financial pressure, even when, some of the big economic numbers look pretty good on paper.
So, yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? Why do so many families still feel so squeezed? Well, as you might guess, there isn't one simple answer. Our source material lays out a few different, competing ideas about what's going on.
So here's what people are pointing to. First, there's the idea that the cost of living, I'm talking housing, healthcare, the big stuff, is just rising way faster than wages. Okay, another argument, that government regulations and taxes are stifling growth. Then there's the theory that a handful of giant corporations can basically set whatever prices they want. Some people say the root cause was offshoring our industrial base, which just hammered wages for decades. And finally, there's this bigger idea that our whole economy is just optimized for cheap consumption, not for stable, productive jobs.
And this whole debate often ends up in a conversation about tariffs. This breakdown here is super helpful. The argument for them is basically, hey, this will help us rebuild American manufacturing and secure our supply chains. It's good for workers and national security. But the argument against them says, hold on, tariffs are just taxes that make stuff more expensive for the middle class, and really only help a few special interests. So you see the trade-off, right? The big question is always, who pays the price and who gets the benefit?
And this brings us right back to that headwind idea again. The reality is, a truly sustainable economy has to do a bunch of really hard things all at once. It's got to raise real wages, it's got to bring down those huge household costs, and it's got to rebuild our ability to actually make things, all without just becoming a machine that hands out permanent subsidies. It's an incredibly tough balancing act.
And all this stuff kind of feeds into our third big theme, this crisis of trust we're seeing in our institutions. This is where you see the cultural debates get super intense, especially around things like schools and the media.
And when it comes to education, it really boils down to this one question. Who should have the final say in shaping a child's worldview? Is it parents or is it schools? It's a really fundamental disagreement about authority.
So one perspective is pretty clear. Parents first. Period. The argument is that the line gets crossed when schools act like parents are just an obstacle, when they're not transparent about what's being taught. From this point of view, a school's job is to educate, not to replace the parent.
Now, the opposing viewpoint frames it a bit differently. It says, look, of course parents are incredibly important, but schools are public institutions. They have a responsibility to prepare all children to participate in a really diverse society. And so, from this view, while parents absolutely have a voice, one parent can't just veto reality for every other kid in the classroom.
And this whole conflict really feeds into a much bigger problem that the source calls the trust deficit. It's basically this widespread feeling that our big institutions, the media, the government, schools, aren't neutral referees anymore. And when people start to believe that these places are pushing a political agenda while pretending they're not, well, it becomes almost impossible to agree on even basic facts.
So what can we actually do about this? Well, the source offers 5 really concrete things that any of us can do. First, actually read the smartest argument from the other side. Second, demand that leaders give you measurable claims, not just empty slogans. Third, just slow down, share less, verify more. Number 4 is a big one. Apply the exact same standards to your own side that you apply to the other. And finally, join a local group that has nothing to do with politics. These are real, tangible things we can do to push back.
And that brings us to our final section, and this one kind of ties it all together. We're going to shift our focus from the what of our disagreements to the how leaders should lead. It's all about the difference between campaigning versus actually governing. This might be the single most important takeaway from all of this. Disagreement, that's normal. It's actually healthy for a republic. The real danger, the thing we have to watch out for, is when one side decides the other side is just illegitimate, when we stop seeing them as opponents and start seeing them as enemies.
So what's the right way to measure our leaders? Well, this draws a really sharp contrast. The wrong way is to use the metrics of a campaign rally: applause, outrage, who's cheering the loudest. But the right metric, the one that actually matters, is about governance. Is life getting measurably better for people? Are things actually getting done? Are they governing better? And this quote just nails it. The future of the republic depends not on who cheers louder, but on who governs better. It's such a powerful and really nonpartisan standard to hold people to. At the end of the day, it's not about who wins the argument online. It's about who can actually deliver.
So, that kind of leaves us with one last big question to think about. As citizens, as a country, what standard are we going to choose? Are we going to be judged by our volume or by our consequences?